we shall examine the one thing that makes avoidants reach out first, that elusive key capable of breaching their carefully constructed emotional walls. For while avoidants are often seen as enigmas of silence, masters of disappearing acts, there is a subtle spark capable of coaxing them from their self-imposed fortresses. Let us, therefore, wander through winding stories and reflections to illuminate how such a spark is born, why it matters, and how it might present itself to those longing for reconnection. Imagine a grand stage draped in midnight blue. At center stage stands a solitary figure, a man or woman who seems coolly detached, even disinterested. This persona, dear viewer, represents the avoidant. You may have encountered such a person in your own life. The colleague who rarely divulges personal details, the romantic partner who politely withdraws whenever closeness beckons, or the friend who seems oddly aloof despite claiming to value your bond. The avoidant is not heartless, nor are they inherently unfeeling. Instead, they've perfected the art of holding the world at arm's length, often out of self-preservation. Each step away is an attempt to protect the delicate, quivering heart that hides beneath the composed exterior. They fear the idea of being overwhelmed by someone else's emotions, or their own. And so they take refuge behind silence, distance, and a calm that can be as chilly as a winter morning. Yet, ironically, avoidants crave connection just like everyone else. They may yearn for friendship, love, or a sense of belonging, albeit in a safer, more controlled way. So you ask, how do we entice them to become the one who reaches out? Why would someone so practiced in retreat ever choose to initiate contact? Before we delve into the one thing that changes everything, let us first appreciate why avoidants are so reticent to pick up the proverbial phone, or send the text, write the email, pen the letter, lest we misunderstand them entirely. Avoidants often bear hidden scars from their formative years or past relationships. It might have been a childhood overshadowed by unpredictability, where every show of vulnerability was met with either harsh critique or neglect. It might have been a series of heartbreaks that convinced them they're safer alone. Whatever the origins, the conclusion they've drawn is, it is less risky for me to keep people at a distance. Hence, the avoidant is predisposed to react with caution, or even suspicion, toward any potential closeness. They worry that if they take the initiative, if they reach out first, it might invite a cascade of demands or expectations they are ill-prepared to handle. It's not that they can't love or feel, it is simply that they fear the cost of those feelings more acutely than most. Thus, they remain behind their walls, waiting, often hoping, that others might do the reaching out to them, so they can decide how much they wish to give, if at all. But if we peek below the surface, we find a paradox. The avoidant can grow tired of solitude. The fortress, once a safe haven, can become a silent prison. Deep within them glimmers the impulse to connect, perhaps a curiosity about how you're faring, or a longing for a conversation that feels genuine and comforting. And yet, to cross the distance first is an act so antithetical to their usual coping strategies that it rarely happens, unless a certain condition is met. And that, dear viewer, is precisely what we shall explore. Allow me, if you will, to recount a small anecdote from a time I wandered the streets of Florence. Picture cobblestone lanes bathed in warm sunlight, the air scented with rosemary and fresh bread. I was visiting an old friend, let us call him Matteo, who had recently ended a tumultuous relationship with a rather avoidant partner named Lucia. Lucia was, by all accounts, an enigma. At social gatherings, she would charm the crowd with her quiet intelligence. Yet whenever matters turned personal, whenever Matteo tried to delve into her dreams or fears, she would back away. Over time, Matteo grew weary of being the only one who reached out, who planned outings, who said the fateful words, "I love you." Eventually, he stopped. Not out of malice, but out of sheer exhaustion. I asked him if Lucia had even noticed the change. His response was a thoughtful sigh. "She noticed," he said, "but she didn't chase me. She just retreated further." And so Matteo resigned himself to letting go, albeit with a heavy heart. He redirected his energies into painting, a sudden and intense desire to capture the Florentine sunsets. Weeks turned into months without a single word from Lucia. Then, quite unexpectedly, one afternoon, as Matteo was preparing his easel by the Arno River, he received a text from her. "How have you been?" it read. The question was gentle, almost timid, and yet it carried the weight of an unexpected transformation. What had changed? Why did the elusive Lucia decide, at long last, to reach out first? The answer lay not in Matteo begging, pleading, or demanding. It did not occur because Lucia was forced into a corner. No, it was because Matteo, in stepping away from the anxious chase, had created a subtle shift in dynamic. He had allowed Lucia the space to feel the absence of connection, and in that space, she found a desire, stronger than her fear, to reconnect. From this, and many other stories, one central theme emerges regarding what might prompt an avoidant to initiate contact: the presence of a calm, respectful distance. Note, dear viewer, I do not mean the petty, silent treatment designed to punish or manipulate. Rather, I speak of a gentle, self-respecting pause, where you cease the frantic attempts to coax the avoidant out of their shell, and instead focus on your own well-being. When you back away with dignity, ceasing to push, pry, or crowd, the avoidant is presented with a new reality. They no longer feel cornered or guilted. They are free to realize, on their own terms, whether they miss the connection. If that sense of longing emerges organically, and if they believe that reconnecting will not trap them in emotional upheaval, then, and often only then, an avoidant may decide to reach out first. Thus, the one thing that makes avoidance reach out is not so much a cunning trick or a carefully crafted line. It is the quiet authenticity of space, stepping out of the chase, releasing them from the silent pressure you may unconsciously exert, and letting them experience what life feels like without you in it, at least temporarily. Often that space fosters a valuable self-reflection that an avoidant rarely indulges in, while someone's trying to break down their walls. Let us refine the idea of space. Many are familiar with the concept of a no-contact period after a breakup or a significant conflict. For some, no contact is about healing, moving on, or establishing boundaries. For others, it's a strategy to stoke the fires of longing in the other person, hoping they will come to their senses and come running back. However, for an avoidant, no contact can be perceived as a relief at first, an affirmation that they need not worry about emotional confrontation. Yet, given enough time, if they genuinely care for the person who has retreated, a flicker of curiosity or desire may spark. They might, for once, find themselves missing the gentle support or companionship they took for granted. The fortress grows quiet, too quiet, and they realize that in their pursuit of absolute independence, they have also relinquished warmth and connection. If that realization feels safe, unburdened by guilt or high-stakes drama, an avoidant might tentatively bridge the gap. They'll likely do so cautiously, perhaps with a brief message or an innocuous question. It's rarely a grand gesture, but that small wave from within the fortress walls can speak volumes. It signals that the one thing they needed, a respectful absence, has nudged them to do the unthinkable, extend a hand from behind their walls. To highlight this point, allow me to share another story, this time from a dear acquaintance named Ella. Ella was a bright, empathetic soul, so warm she could melt the iciest hearts. Unfortunately, her affections were directed toward a staunch avoidant named Robert. Robert, mindful of his own space, maintained a sporadic communication style. One day, he would text with breezy charm. The next, he would disappear for weeks. Alarmed by these vanishing acts, Ella decided to persuade him, vigorously, to open up. She sent heartfelt letters, planned elaborate surprises, and even turned up unannounced at his doorstep with homemade soup when he mentioned feeling under the weather. Each gesture, though well-intentioned, pushed him deeper into retreat. His mind read it as an invasion, a harbinger of emotional dependency that he was determined to avoid. In the end, Robert changed his number and blocked Ella. Heartbroken and confused, she asked herself, "What could I have done differently?" The answer, sadly, was that her relentless attempts to breach his walls inadvertently fortified them. Had Ella, upon sensing resistance, chosen to step back gently and focus on her own life, her art, her passions, her friendships, Robert might have eventually felt a pang of longing. He might have reached out to inquire how she was, or commented on her latest painting or poem, seeking that spark he remembered. But the constant siege left him feeling cornered. This cautionary tale reminds us that the one thing that spurs an avoidant to reach out first is rarely a barrage of attention. It is, counterintuitively, the gracious bestowal of breathing room. From a psychological standpoint, space allows the avoidant to reframe the relationship on their terms. When you stop pushing them to respond or chasing them to connect, you dismantle the narrative that closeness equals pressure. Instead, you create an environment where they have the choice to come forward if, and only if, they desire it. This might remind you of the old adage, "If you love something, set it free." While it has become something of a cliché, the sentiment holds some wisdom, particularly with avoidants. Restrained as they are by their fear of emotional overload, the sensation of freedom can be unexpectedly enticing. Once they realize you are not there to impinge upon their autonomy, they may drift closer, motivated by curiosity, respect, or a sense of missing you that they can no longer deny. Of course, we must not confuse space with passive-aggressive withdrawal. True space is not a game you play to manipulate them into compliance. Instead, it's a sincere acceptance that the avoidant has the right to their own timeline, their own coping style, and their own decisions about whom they allow inside their fortress. When that acceptance is genuine, it resonates as an invitation, not a trap. Now that we've illuminated the principle, let us consider some pragmatic ways to foster the environment in which an avoidant might reach out first. Reaffirm your own center. Instead of obsessing over why they haven't texted you, refocus on the activities, pursuits, and people that bring you joy. Whether that's painting, hiking, or spending time with close friends, immersing yourself in your own life not only benefits your well-being, but also subtly communicates that you do not hinge your entire existence on their next move. Offer a respectful parting if necessary. If your dynamic has become fraught with tension, consider calmly stating something like, "I sense we both need some space. I'm here if you ever want to talk, but I respect if you need time." Then honor those words by genuinely giving them room. This phrase can be pivotal because it places the doorstop on their side of the threshold. Don't monitor their every move. Checking their social media or asking mutual friends about them can become a form of emotional stalking that ironically keeps you invested in their distance. Resist that temptation. Let them breathe, and let yourself breathe too. Maintain a welcoming demeanor. In your final interactions, before stepping away, make sure you are not venomous or bitter. Offer kindness and wish them well, genuinely, if you can. A parting free of hostility leaves a better aftertaste, making it more likely they'll be open to contacting you when they feel ready. Be prepared for increments, not grand gestures. If and when they do reach out, it might be a small message. "Hey, how have you been?" Or a random, "I saw something that reminded me of you." Resist the impulse to flood them with a deluge of emotions. Instead, meet them at their comfort level, responding with a warmth that neither smothers nor dismisses. These steps do not guarantee the avoidant will re-emerge from their fortress, but they create the conditions most conducive to it. Paradoxically, The best way to encourage them to step forward is to stop trying so hard to pull them. Allow me to spin an allegory, if you will. Picture a small stone courtyard surrounded by high walls. Within the courtyard perches a delicate bird, one that has known only captivity. Whenever a well-meaning caretaker tries to scoop up the bird with eager hands, it flutters into a distant corner, panic in its eyes. So the caretaker decides upon a new approach. They open a small door in the courtyard wall and place a dish of seed at a comfortable distance. Then they walk away. At first, the bird eyes the dish warily, but the caretaker doesn't intrude, doesn't hurry the bird along, doesn't wave arms frantically to coax it out. Eventually, curiosity and hunger outweigh the bird's fear. It hops closer, pecking gingerly at the seed. Perhaps it decides to remain in the courtyard that day, or perhaps it flies out into the open air. The critical point is that the bird, unhurried and unthreatened, chose to move on its own. And that, dear viewer, is precisely how the avoidant can be, with enough space and a safe environment to explore connection without feeling cornered. You might wonder, what goes on inside the avoidant's head while all this transpires? Let us venture into their possible thought processes. At first, when you step back, an avoidant might feel relief. The pressure's off. But as days or weeks unfold, they may begin to sense a subtle shift. I wonder what they're doing. It's odd not hearing from them. They used to be so persistent. Maybe I do miss talking to them. Am I free now, or lonely? Possibly both. They might reminisce about times you shared laughter, or a conversation that felt strangely comforting. If your last interaction ended on a note of understanding rather than bitterness, they may recall you as someone safe rather than smothering. And in that recollection, a flicker of warmth might stir them to type your name into their phone, open a messaging app, or perhaps find an old photo and share it with a note that says, "Remember this day." It is all too easy to label the avoidant as cold or unfeeling. Indeed, many do. But this label often stems from frustration or heartbreak. The truth, in most cases, is that the avoidant experiences deep emotion but has learned that demonstrating it can lead to painful outcomes. They may see themselves as rational or self-sufficient, but in truth, they're often more anxious inside than they let on. This is why the power of space and the possibility of them reaching out can be so profound. It enables them to choose closeness on their own terms, which, paradoxically, can make that closeness feel safer. They're not being dragged into a situation they dread. They're exploring an interaction because some part of them actually wants it. Returning to Matteo and Lucia for a moment. After Lucia's unexpected text, Matteo replied politely, not diving into the painful questions of why she disappeared or how she had hurt him. He merely said something like, "I've been focusing on my painting. How are you?" The exchange was brief, careful, yet Lucia continued messaging, gradually revealing she'd felt overwhelmed by the intensity of their previous interactions. She admitted she'd worried Matteo would want too much from her. Matteo, mindful of what he'd learned about space, offered her a measure of reassurance without cornering her. He said he respected her need for autonomy and wasn't seeking to devour her freedom. Over time, days, weeks, months, Lucia began to trust that reaching out didn't mean losing herself. Eventually, they rebuilt a connection on a new foundation, one that honored both Matteo's desire for closeness and Lucia's need for spaciousness. They did not fuse into a picture-perfect couple overnight. Indeed, their dance was delicate, sometimes fraught with the old pattern of push and pull. But each time Lucia felt the old fears rising, she remembered that Matteo wouldn't chase her, nor would he vanish with fury if she asked for a little room. This gave her the courage to remain in dialogue, bridging the gap in small but consistent ways. A critical element in prompting an avoidant to reach out is the subtle art of letting go, truly letting go, not merely pretending to. If you're clinging to the hope that they'll text any minute, I just know it, You're, in effect, still extending invisible threads of emotional pressure. That internal tension can seep into your interactions if they do resurface, revealing an undercurrent of desperation. Letting go is not about ceasing to care, but about accepting that you cannot force closeness from someone who isn't ready. By genuinely releasing your grip on the outcome, you free both yourself and the avoidant from the cycle of expectation and disappointment. Paradoxically, that freedom can be the very thing that nudges the avoidant's heart to wonder, might I actually want their presence now that they are no longer demanding mine? One cannot ignore the sobering truth that an avoidant may or may not reach out, even when you create the ideal conditions. Sometimes their fears run so deep that silence becomes their lifelong companion. Or perhaps they find solace in isolation, believing it to be simpler than navigating the complexities of shared emotions. If that happens, consider it no reflection on your worth or the merit of your approach. It's important, then, to prepare yourself for the possibility that the call or message never comes. In such cases, you have not failed. You have simply respected their boundaries. Focus on living fully, building nourishing connections with others who do choose to engage. Doing so doesn't negate any fondness or care you have for the avoidant. It merely acknowledges that not all parted ways are destined to converge again. But should they reach out, what a testament to the subtle power of space. They do so willingly, perhaps with cautious curiosity, and in that choice lies a seed of genuine connection that can be nurtured if both parties desire it. Often, the intangible forces that draw an avoidant to reach out are nostalgia and curiosity. During the hush that follows your graceful step away, the avoidant might revisit memories, a shared joke, a moment of surprising tenderness, a heartfelt conversation that momentarily disarmed them. Over time, these recollections can soften their resolve. Likewise, curiosity creeps in. What have you been up to? Are you living well without them? Have you forged new friendships or discovered new passions? The avoidant, often wanting to maintain an illusion of being unmoved, may find themselves quietly intrigued, enough perhaps to muster the courage for a small hello. And from that small greeting, a renewed dialogue can begin, provided you respond with balanced warmth, neither overwhelming them nor brushing them off. So, dear viewer, let us articulate clearly the heart of this monologue. The one thing that makes avoidance reach out first is the provision of respectful, non-manipulative space. It is the shift from incessant pursuit to self-assured distance, which grants them the emotional oxygen to reflect on what they truly want. This is no guarantee of renewed closeness, but it is the condition under which an avoidant is most likely to initiate contact on their own accord. That contact may come slowly, quietly, perhaps even unpredictably. Yet it is a genuine step forward, for it arises not from guilt or force, but from the avoidant's internal realization that they miss your presence or value your company. In that voluntary motion, one sees the bud of a new chapter, one where the fortress door opens from the inside, not battered down by your insistent knocks. In summary, if you find yourself yearning for an avoidant to reach out and you've exhausted your attempts to talk, text, or otherwise coax them from their shell, consider reversing the polarity of your approach. Invest your energies in living your best life, stepping away from the chase. Let them see, albeit from afar, that your happiness does not hinge solely upon their participation. For an avoidant, the realization that someone can care for them while also respecting their space is a revelation as stunning as any sunrise. It chips away at their assumptions that emotional closeness inevitably leads to suffocation. With time, the memory of your balanced stance may spark a new curiosity, prompting them to test the waters of communication once more. Of course, even after they reach out, the journey is far from simple. The avoidant's old defenses don't vanish overnight. But the crucial difference is that the impetus to communicate arises from within them. They do not feel ambushed or coerced. And in that self-chosen step lies the potential for a more enduring foundation, one built on mutual respect rather than frantic pursuit. And so we arrive at the conclusion of our exploration. Perhaps you find yourself resonating with these tales, recognizing how your own interactions have mirrored these patterns. Take heart. Understanding the reason behind someone's avoidance can foster compassion, not only for them but for yourself. By gracefully releasing the need to push for contact, you create a stillness within which the avoidant may discover their own desire to reconnect, and if they do not, you remain free, having preserved your dignity and your sense of self-worth. In many ways, it is a win-win scenario. You can rest assured that you offered them the gift of freedom, often the greatest gift one can give to a soul that flinches from closeness. Should they ever wake from their self-imposed solitude, it will be of their own volition, and that choice will mean all the more. So, dear viewer, remember this as you go forth. The one thing that makes avoidance reach out first is not cunning manipulation, but a sincere willingness to step back, to trust in the quiet power of respectful absence. Like an echo that returns only when the world is still, the avoidance outreach can be a gentle testament to the truth that sometimes less is more. Less pressure, fewer demands, and a great deal more understanding. Let that understanding be your lantern in the night, guiding you through the hush of uncertain waiting. For if they do raise their hand from behind those lofty walls, you'll know it was no accident or reaction to force. Rather, it was a choice, a fragile, hopeful choice that might just be the beginning of a deeper, more genuine bond.